Hi everyone, and welcome to the Sound Mind podcast, where we dive into the fascinating world of music psychology. I'm your host, Sophia, and as a music psychologist, I'll be guiding you through everything you've ever wanted to know about music. So whether you're a music lover or are just interested in the science of sound, you're in the right place. And welcome to our 10th episode. That's exciting. It feels like a milestone, so I want to acknowledge it. I want to celebrate it. So here we are. I am so happy that we made it to this point. I've wanted to start this podcast for, years really, and I'm just so happy that we're finally making this happen. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get on with today's episode. So today's episode is all about goosebumps, or a phenomenon known as frisson. Have you ever experienced that moment when a song just hits in a certain way that makes your skin tingle and the hairs on your arms stand up? Well, that's what we're unpacking today. We'll be talking about why music gives us goosebumps, what's happening in our brains, and why some people feel it deeply whilst others never do. So let's get into it. Let's start off with the basics. Goosebumps, scientifically known as piloerection, are a biological response where tiny muscles at the base of our hair follicles contract, causing the hairs to stand on end. This gives that familiar prickly sensation, and in some cases, a visible rise of the skin. It's essentially a reflex, something your body does automatically, without your conscious input. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. This reflex is a leftover from our evolutionary past, a remnant from the days where our ancestors were much, hairier. Back then, piloerection had a very real survival function. When an animal was cold, the raised hairs would trap more air and create insulation, kind of like a natural built-in puffer jacket, if you will. And when they felt threatened or scared, the raised fur would make them appear larger and more intimidating to predators. Think of a scared cat puffing up. That's piloerection in action. But as humans evolved and lost most of their body hair, the functional benefits of this reflex faded. Today, we no longer rely on it to keep warm or ward off enemies, but the reflex itself remains hardwired into our nervous system. What's even more fascinating is that the same reflex that once helped our ancestors survive is now being activated by something as intangible as emotion. And not just fear or danger, which makes sense evolutionarily, but also feelings of awe, nostalgia, poignancy, and beauty. That means that you can get goosebumps during a powerful scene in a film, a moment of personal triumph, a deep spiritual experience, and, of course, while listening to music. In a strange but beautiful twist of biology, our primal survival response is now being hijacked by the arts, which is actually kind of beautiful. And this phenomenon has actually been given its own name, frisson. And these aesthetic chills occur in response to a rewarding stimuli which induces a positive response, linked to the emotional and sensory stimulation provided by, music and other art forms. But what is it about music, of all things, that can hijack that ancient response? Well, to answer that question, I want to dive into one of my absolute favourite frameworks in music psychology, BRECVEMA. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you'll know this acronym by now, and hopefully love it just as much as I do. But in case you're new here, BRECVEMA stands for Brainstem Reflex, Rhythmic Entrainment, Evaluative Conditioning, Contagion, Visual Imagery, Episodic Memory, Musical Expectancy, and Aesthetic Judgment. Now, each of these components represents a different emotional trigger or psychological pathway that music can use to evoke deep physical reactions. Now, I explore each of these in a bit more detail in my first episode, Why We Love Music, so if you're keen to dive deeper into the framework, definitely check that out. But for now, let's break it down and see how each of these elements contributes to the phenomenon of frisson. Think of it like this. Music activates a cocktail of responses. Some are deeply rooted in survival, others are shaped by personal experience. It's not just one single reason that we get chills. It's often several of these mechanisms working together. So, okay, let's break it down. So, starting off with the brainstem reflex. This is the most primal root. It's all about sudden, unexpected changes in sound, like a dramatic crescendo, a piercing note, or an abrupt silence. Your brainstem, which is in charge of automatic survival function, goes, wait, what was that? And it spikes your arousal levels. It's the same system that would have once responded to a twig snapping in the forest, but now it responds to an epic key change. That jolt in your system can lead to chills. And this response is a rush of dopamine triggered by emotionally intense music. It's a subjective feeling, or when music violates your expectations in a way that excites your brain. So it could be that sudden key change, but it could also be a powerful vocal note, or a dramatic pause, or even layered harmonies that build tension. That burst of dopamine is your brain's reward for the emotional impact, and it feels good. It's your body's way of saying, yeah, that was intense. Music has rhythm, and so do our bodies. Think heartbeat, breathing, walking pace. And entrainment is when your body's internal rhythms sync up with the external beat. When this happens just right, or suddenly shifts in an unexpected way, it can heighten emotional arousal and spill over into a physical reaction like goosebumps. Imagine the deep resonance of a bass drum, or the heartbeat-like thumping of a dance track. Your body's rhythms syncing with these sounds can trigger a powerful emotional response, adding to that physical tingle. Now, evaluative conditioning is all about the emotional associations that we have with music. Maybe a song reminds you of a first kiss, a goodbye, or a childhood moment. And over time, your brain attaches emotion to the music, and hearing it again reactivates that emotional memory. The feelings come flooding back, and sometimes so do the shivers. That's when you might get goosebumps, a lump in your throat, or that spine-tingling feeling that we call frisson. It's one of the ways that music becomes a deeply personal, emotional experience, and why certain songs seem to hit you harder than others, even if you can't always explain why. And evaluative conditioning isn't always just about the original emotional event tied to the song. It can also layer over time. So if a song gave you shivers once during an especially emotional moment, your brain can remember that response too. The next time you hear it, you're not only recalling the life event connected to the song, but also the physical sensation or emotional intensity that you felt the last time that you heard it. In other words, you can get chills about the chills. It becomes a kind of emotional echo. So yes, when a song gave you shivers before, your brain might tag that experience as meaningful or powerful, and the next time it plays, it reactivates that memory too, reinforcing the emotional loop and making the chills even more likely. Super interesting. Now moving on to emotional contagion. Humans are wired for empathy, and music taps into this through this mechanism. When you hear a singer's voice crack with grief or a melody that swells with sadness, your brain doesn't just hear it, it feels it. And this empathetic mirroring of emotion can be so strong that it triggers a physical response. In the same way that we pick up on others' emotions in real life, music allows us to catch the emotions that it expresses, from elation to sorrow, often bringing on those all too familiar chills. It's the same reason why we might tear up during a film score or feel uplifted by a chorus. Our brains are decoding the emotional cues in the music, the tone, the rhythm, the dynamics, and in turn, we're generating a matching emotional response. This mirroring can be so vivid that it sparks a visceral reaction. But music doesn't just speak to our ears, it also speaks to our imagination. And one of its most fascinating powers is the ability to spark vivid mental imagery. These images aren't just abstract, they're emotionally charged and can stir up strong physical sensations, including goosebumps. When the mental pictures created by music are tied to deep emotions, the body responds by amplifying the experience. Maybe it's a golden field at sunset, a rainy night in a city that you've never been to, or a moment that you lived years ago. Whatever it is, it's brought back to life through sound. And this happens because your brain processes emotionally rich imagery and memory with the same systems it uses to process real-life experience. In other words, your mind might know it's imagined, but your body doesn't. And that's why certain pieces of music can feel almost transportive. The combination of emotion and mental imagery creates a multisensory experience that's immersive, powerful, and sometimes overwhelming in the best way. It's like your brain and body are being pulled into a daydream, one that feels as real as any memory. But now let's talk about real memories. The connection between music and memory is incredibly strong. You hear the opening bars of a song and suddenly you're transported back to another time, another place, a moment in your life where that song was the soundtrack. The connection between music and memory is incredibly strong because music activates a unique part of our brain, the hippocampus, which plays a crucial role in forming and recalling personal memories. Now, I did do an entire episode on this, so if you're interested in diving more into music and memory, I suggest listening to episode 7. But when it comes to Goosebumps or Frisson, when music taps into those rich memories that we have, it can evoke an emotional response that's so potent it results in goosebumps. Now, this isn't just any memory. It's a personal memory tied to something meaningful. These moments are often emotionally charged and have a lasting impact on us. When we hear that song again, we don't just remember the moment. We relive the feelings, the smells, the sights, the entire atmosphere that surrounded that time. And this sensory time travel is deeply rooted in the brain's emotional processing system. So when the music revisits those memories, the emotional weight of the experience floods back, and the result is often a physical reaction, like goosebumps. Moving on to musical expectancy. Our brains are always predicting what comes next in a piece of music. And when those expectations are violated with an unexpected harmony, a breathtaking pause, or even a drop that just hits right, it can create emotional tension and release. And that surge is Goosebumps Gold. In a 2018 study by Huron, it was examined how specific elements in music, such as changes in harmony, texture, or pitch, contribute to the sensation of chills. Huron found that musical moments that create unexpected tension or violate musical norms, such as a sudden key change or a suspended chord, were more likely to trigger a goosebump response. And this aligns with what we know about how dopamine is released in response to surprise and reward in anticipation of a musical resolution. Now, I'm going to get a bit more into this in the next section of this episode when we dive into the neuroscience. But for now, I just want to touch on a key aspect of musical expectation, which is the peak moment. Now, this is the powerful climax or the unexpected resolution that elevates the emotional experience of the music. This could be anything from a sudden key change to an epic instrumental solo or a harmony that resolves in a way that you didn't see coming. And these peaks are especially potent because they create a sense of release after tension buildup, which the brain finds deeply satisfying. It's the emotional payoff for all the built-up anticipation, and it triggers a powerful dopamine response, reinforcing the feeling of reward. The science behind why these musical peaks are so compelling ties into cognitive models of surprise and resolution. In this way, musical peaks become emotional landmarks in a song, elevating the listener's experience and making them feel profoundly moved. whether that's through goosebumps or not. Now, to wrap up the Breck-Wemer framework, let's touch on the final component of aesthetic judgment. Sometimes the reaction to music is simpler yet just as profound. It's an overwhelming sense of beauty. Certain pieces of music bypass our logical reasoning and tap into something deeper, leaving us breathless in awe. And this experience of beauty, of being emotionally overcome by how something sounds, can be a major trigger for frisson. This is a feeling that you get when a piece of music feels so perfect or so stirring that it transcends the everyday, taking you to a place of pure emotional elevation. And like I said, these pathways don't usually work in isolation. Imagine this: a soaring vocal triggers a memory of, say, your wedding day, while your heart starts syncing with the beat. And then, right when you're least expecting it, the music drops in a way that surprises and satisfies your brain. The result? Goosebumps, often with a guarantee. So, as we now know, when we experience goosebumps, it's far from a random reaction. Instead, it's the result of a complex interaction between the brain's emotional, reward, and sensory systems. Neuroscience has shed light on the key brain regions that play significant roles in how we process and experience music on both an emotional and physical level. Research shows that these musical chills activate a network of brain areas, each contributing to the intensity of the response. First up is the amygdala, which is a small almond-shaped structure buried deep in the brain. But despite its size, it plays a huge role in how we process emotion, especially those tied to fear, joy, surprise, and nostalgia. When a song evokes a strong emotional response, it's the amygdala that lights up, helping us feel the music as more than just sound. Whether it's the haunting swell of strings or a drop in the beat that hits us right in the chest, the amygdala helps encode the emotional weight of that moment. It acts like a bridge between raw sensation and emotional memory, making music feel intensely personal, even visceral. Next, we move to the ventral striatum, a core part of the brain's reward system. This region is responsible for the release of dopamine, the feel-good transmitter, and it lights up when we encounter things that bring us joy or satisfaction, from feel-good food to falling in love. And when the music builds tension and then releases it in just the right way, the ventral striatum reacts with a rush of pleasure. It's this dopamine surge that often leads to the physical chills or irresistible urge to replay the track over and over again. It's your brain's way of saying, whatever this is, I want more of it. And finally, we arrive at the prefrontal cortex, the most evolved part of the brain. This is a seat of reasoning, reflection, and self-awareness. And this is where we make sense of the emotional impact of the music. The prefrontal cortex assesses whether the music aligns with our expectations, taps into a memory, or mirrors our current mood. It's where the abstract becomes meaningful. And this region doesn't just help us feel music, it helps us understand why it moves us. It's the part of the brain that reflects, why does this song feel like it's telling my story? When all three of these regions fire together, emotional memory from the amygdala, reward response from the ventral striatum, and reflective meaning-making from the prefrontal cortex, you get that rare, magical combination: aesthetic chills. Music becomes more than a sound, it becomes a whole body experience. So we've spoken a lot so far about dopamine, the neurotransmitter often associated with pleasure, motivation, and reward. But I want to get into it a little bit more. Dopamine is involved in reward anticipation, and when we hear music that stirs us emotionally, dopamine levels spike, especially just before the emotional peak of the music that I mentioned earlier. This is the brain's way of preparing for a reward, and it makes the experience feel a little bit extra intense. In one study, PET scans were used to observe the brain's response to pleasurable music. The studies show that during moments of chills, dopamine levels in the brain spike significantly. In fact, the researchers found that dopamine was released just before the peak of a piece of music, suggesting that the brain is anticipating the emotional climax. This surge in dopamine makes us feel excited, emotionally aroused, and deeply connected to the moment, ultimately contributing to the goosebumps that we experience. The release of dopamine during these emotional musical moments reinforces why certain songs, moments, or musical cues can become addictive. We want that feeling again, which is why we repeatedly return to those tracks that give us chills. Several other studies have also explored the neural mechanisms behind music-induced chills. Another study used functional MRI scans to investigate the brain's response to music that invokes strong emotional reactions. The study found that the regions involved in the anticipation of pleasure were strongly activated during chills. In addition, brain regions linked to self-reflection and emotional regulation, like the prefrontal cortex, were also engaged, indicating that the experience is not just about the raw emotional reaction to the sound, but also our cognitive processing of that reaction. In other words, goosebumps are your nervous system's standing ovation. It's your body's way of processing and reacting to music in a deeply embodied, emotional, and reward-driven way. This makes sense when you consider that music has been part of human culture for tens of thousands of years. It's not just about entertainment, it's about emotional communication, connection, and survival. Now, before we move forward, I just want to say, if you're enjoying this episode, it would mean so much if you could rate the podcast or leave a quick review wherever you're listening. It really makes a huge difference in helping the Sound Mind reach more like-minded listeners just like you. Thank you so much for your support, and with that being said, let's get on with the episode. Now, while music itself is an obvious catalyst for goosebumps, your environment and current emotional state can really amp up the experience. It's not just about what you're listening to, it's also about how and where you're listening. Your mood plays a huge role in how your brain responds to music. Research shows that when you're emotionally open, more nostalgic, or even a little vulnerable, your brain is primed to react to the emotional cues in the music. For example, if you're feeling a bit down or melancholic, a sad song can trigger a deeper emotional response, often perhaps leading to chills. On the other hand, if you're feeling happy or relaxed, an uplifting tune might give you a similar but positive emotional rush. In fact, studies show that emotional sensitivity, or what psychologists call trait emotionality, can make you more likely to experience emotional chills. Essentially, your emotional state works like a filter, making you more receptive to the emotional content of the music. This means that when you're in a heightened emotional state, you're more likely to feel those physical chills. Now let's talk about the environment. The space where you're listening can make a big difference in how goosebumps hit you. Think about the energy of a live concert. The crowd, the acoustics, the atmosphere, all of that contributes to amplifying the music's emotional impact. When you're surrounded by people who are equally moved by the music, there's a shared emotional experience that can heighten your own response. But it's not just concerts. Studies have found that certain environmental factors, like temperature and lighting, can intensify the physical sensation of goosebumps. For example, when you listen to music in a cool, dark room, you might find that the sensation of chills is stronger. But why? Well, part of it is physiological. Goosebumps are inherently linked to feeling cold. They're a leftover survival mechanism from when our ancestors had more body hair, right? So, when you're already in a slightly chilly space, your body is primed to notice and react to that tingling sensation more sharply. It's like turning up the contrast on your emotional and physical responses. And then there's the darkness. When visual distractions are minimized, your attention becomes laser-focused on what you hear. The music feels closer, more immersive, like it's filling up the entire room or even your whole body. Your brain isn't trying to juggle visual inputs, so it channels all of its resources into decoding and emotionally responding to the sound. This heightened focus deepens your engagement, which can make the emotional impact of the music and the physical chills even stronger. And what's a perfect example of a cool, dark room designed for immersive listening? A cinema. Movie soundtracks are composed with the goal of moving you, not just emotionally, but physically. It's all engineered to trigger something in your body. The sound is loud, the room is dark, and the temperature is always low, all of which create the perfect storm for goosebumps. That's why a film score can hit you in the chest in a way that sometimes feels more powerful than music played in broad daylight. It's not just about what you're hearing, it's about how and where you're hearing it. Okay, so far we've explored how music, your emotional state, and your environment can shape the goosebump experience. But there's one more critical factor to consider. Well, you. Your personal traits, musical background, and how you connect with music as an individual. It's not everyone that experiences goosebumps. Interestingly, only around 50% of people report feeling musical chills regularly. Well, it may come down to personal traits and even brain structure. Some research suggests that people who are more open to experience, those who score high in imagination, emotion, and curiosity, are more likely to get chills. This personality trait means that their brains may be more sensitive to emotional stimuli, especially those delivered through music. They're wired to respond more strongly to the emotional cues that music sends out. Other studies show that people with a higher volume of white matter connecting the auditory and emotional regions of the brain are more prone to frisson. White matter plays a key role in communication between brain regions, and those with more white matter linking these emotional centers might have more efficient connection between the music they hear and the emotional response that it evokes. Essentially, your brain might just be wired for deeper emotional responses to music. So it's not just about what music you listen to, it's also about how your brain is structured and how open you are to experiencing the emotions that music can stir up. Our individual differences, from personality traits to brain anatomy, shape how we experience the power of music and determine whether or not we feel those iconic goosebumps. One of the biggest influences in how we respond to music is our musical background. Research shows that people with formal musical training are more likely to experience goosebumps than those without it. Musicians tend to have a deeper understanding of musical structure and emotional expression. They're more likely to recognize the subtle shifts in harmony, the tension in a key change, or the beauty of a perfectly executed note, all of which can trigger an intense emotional and physical response. In fact, a study found that individuals with musical training are more sensitive to the emotional content in music. Their brains are better attuned to the complexities of musical compositions, so this heightened sensitivity makes them more likely to experience frisson. But it's not all about musical knowledge when it comes to experiencing goosebumps. Our personality traits also play a significant role in how we react to music. So I mentioned previously that research suggests that individuals with high openness, which is one of the big 5 personality traits, are more likely to experience chills when listening to music. These individuals may find themselves moved by the smallest details in a song, whether it's a sudden pause, a shift in dynamics, or an unexpected chord change. Their brains are more sensitive to these emotional triggers, reacting with physical responses like goosebumps. This emotional sensitivity ties directly to creativity. Studies show that those who are emotionally attuned to music tend to have higher levels of creativity. And this connection likely arises from the fact that people who experience frisson may have brains that are more open to intense or new stimuli. When someone is more receptive to these emotional and sensory experiences, their brain becomes more adaptable and capable of processing complex or novel ideas. This openness could be a key factor in creative thinking, as it allows individuals to break free from conventional thought patterns and think in more imaginative ways. Additionally, emotional sensitivity also plays a key role in the experience of frisson. Those who are more emotionally sensitive or empathetic are more likely to feel goosebumps during music. Because they have a deeper connection to the emotions conveyed by the music, they don't just hear the music, they feel it more intensely. This heightened emotional awareness may also boost their ability to make creative connections, leading to fresh insights or new perspectives. So, when your body reacts to music with chills, it might not just be a sign of emotional connection, it could also indicate that your brain is primed for creativity. Your personal music preferences also determine how you experience goosebumps. If a particular genre or artist deeply resonates with you, you're more likely to experience chills when listening to their music. A study showed that people tend to experience goosebumps when listening to music that aligns with their emotional or cognitive preferences. For example, someone who loves classical music might feel chills during a powerful orchestral movement, while someone who enjoys electronic music might get goosebumps when the bass drops in a track. These emotional reactions stem from emotional engagement. When you're emotionally invested in a song, your brain is more likely to signal those reward-based physical responses. The brain's reward system, as we've discussed before, plays a significant role here. The more emotionally engaged you are, the stronger your brain's response, which can lead to goosebumps. But while individual traits and brain wiring play a significant role in whether or not we experience goosebumps, cultural context can also have a profound influence on how music affects us. What triggers goosebumps for one person might not do the same for someone from a different cultural background, and this is largely due to the unique musical exposure and associations that we develop throughout our lives. For example, in Western cultures, symphonic music like the works of Beethoven or Mozart might trigger chills due to the emotional depth and even familiarity of the music. These pieces are often associated with moments of grandeur, historical significance, or personal milestones. On the other hand, someone raised in a completely different cultural context, say in African or Indian musical tradition, may not respond in the same way to Western classical music. Instead, they might experience goosebumps when listening to the intricate rhythms of drumming patterns, instruments that hold deep cultural meaning in their own communities. So, research actually shows that our emotional responses to music are shaped by the sounds that we encounter growing up. For instance, another study by Huron suggested that we're most sensitive to the musical conventions of our own culture, which means that melodies, harmonies, or rhythms that are familiar to us may trigger stronger emotional responses. These responses are learned over time through repeated exposure to the music in various contexts, such as family gatherings, celebrations, or even religious ceremonies. Music often carries specific cultural symbols or associations that can amplify their emotional intensity. A piece of music associated with a national anthem, for example, can evoke strong feelings of patriotism, pride, or nostalgia in people from that country, triggering goosebumps. But of course, the same anthem may not elicit the same response from someone who hasn't been raised in that culture, even though the melody and the rhythm remain the same. Of course, a person's individual musical preferences can also be influenced by their cultural background. This creates an intersection of personal traits and cultural conditioning, where an individual's emotional wiring, shaped by both their upbringing and their exposure to various musical styles, influences the likelihood and intensity of experiencing goosebumps. Essentially, while our brain's emotional and reward systems are universal, the musical landscape through which they engage varies widely. It's a fascinating reminder that our emotional responses to music are not only biological, but deeply connected to the cultural narratives that we carry with us. Now, before we finish today's episode, I asked all of you on Threads to tell me what song gives you chills, and if you can put your finger on it, to explain why. So I received over 50 responses, which I find completely fascinating, but I wanted to feature a few of these now just to highlight the diversity in our experiences. So starting off, one person said Whitney Houston's rendition of the USA's national anthem. That ties into the point that I made regarding cultural context, which is really interesting. Someone else said in their own words, "It Won't Be Long" by the Beatles. The authentic emotional energy comes through in every note, every chord, every yeah. No need for deep lyrical poetry. When John Lennon sings "You're Coming Home," it's as timelessly real as a pop record gets. Goosebumps City. I love that, and so well put as well. I love it. Someone else said Night Wish, The Poet and the Pendulum. It's a multi-part song about the songwriter's depression after they fired the longtime lead singer. The lyrics in the final movement are based on supportive words his family gave him at the time and give me shivers every time. Listen to or watch the live version from Wembley in 2015. That's such an amazing backstory, and I think that really plays into the emotional context of a song. I think if you know the story behind it, it also adds this whole other meaning, which can really unlock that physical reaction as well. Someone else mentioned a Portuguese fado song, and this is actually something that I mentioned in last week's episode on sad music. And they said that the song reflects themes of nostalgia, longing, and emotional connection to one's homeland and people. You don't need to know Portuguese to understand the sadness of the song. And I love that. That really highlights that, this whole thing of emotional contagion, that you don't need to necessarily understand the lyrics, but it's the sadness and emotion that's portrayed in the music itself that our brains and bodies can just pick up on. Here's another story of a goosebump track by someone. It's The Tower of Song by Leonard Cohen. They said that I was unintentionally in his crowd at Glastonbury in 2008. There was a huge crush to get near the stage because Amy Winehouse was on next. He sang the line, "I have no choice, I was born with the gift of a golden voice," and the entire crowd seemed to catch its breath in wonder. It was a moment of pure mass delight. That sounds absolutely phenomenal, and I'm so jealous that you got to see Leonard Cohen live. And that's such a classic example of a concert enabling a mass moment of physical and emotional enjoyment, and just having that experience with everyone in the crowd is such an amazing thing. Someone else said Wheel in the Sky by Journey. From the first time I heard it in 1978, Steve Perry's soaring vocals gave me the chills. That's never changed in all the years since. Another story, someone said that just last week, driving in my car, Imagine by John Lennon came on. It was the first song I ever bought on 45 when I was 10 years old. As I was singing, I suddenly felt goosebumps start at my feet and run all the way up to the top of my head. They ran over my whole body, but the back of my head to the top. I was overwhelmed by emotion feeling it, given the state of America. This one was so intense, but reassuring. Wow, what an experience. That's amazing. And I think it's such a beautiful thing to be able to experience something like that as well. Like I said, not everyone will have the opportunity in their life to experience such an overwhelming, but like you said, reassuring moment with music. I think especially given the song that it was, and like you said, the current context, it's almost like a message. And a lot of people do experience those strong moments with music when it is something perhaps spiritually related, maybe taking it as a sign almost. So yeah, amazing that you had an experience like that. And just some songs given by some of you. Someone said Space Odyssey by David Bowie, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, Anything by Kate Bush, and Defying Gravity. So yeah, a really broad range there in all your responses. And just to finish off with, I really love the way that one person put it. They said, "It's not so much of a song as lots of different ones that gives me goosebumps. It's more about the feeling or even the resonance of the sound that triggers the frisson. It could be swelling strings, a haunting melody, or a particularly ethereal voice. For me, musical frisson transcends genres, instruments, and even geography. If it feels or sounds good, any music from any time or place could set me off in the most blissful way. I think that just sums it all up, and I think that's such a beautiful way of putting it. I'm always in awe whenever I ask you guys for responses, how well you're able to put your thoughts and emotions into words. It's just amazing. So thank you so much to everyone who responded over on Threads. But there you have it, the science behind Frisson. Music taps into a variety of deeply rooted psychological and physiological pathways that make us feel something profound. It's not just one thing that causes chills, but a cocktail of responses. The surprise, the tension, the memory, and of course, the beauty, which I think is all summed up also in your responses as well today. Ultimately, what's so fascinating about this whole process is that music isn't just a sound. It's an experience, something that has the power to trigger emotions, memories, and even physical reactions. So next time you feel those chills, you'll know exactly why. It's your brain and body celebrating the incredible multisensory effect of music. It's a reminder that the next time you press play, you might just be about to embark on another emotional journey, one where goosebumps might just be waiting for you. That's all for this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining me today on The Sound Mind and for our 10th episode. If you've enjoyed it, please rate or review on wherever you're listening and share it with someone who loves music just as much as you do or might just find it interesting. Don't forget to follow us and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Also, come and say hi on Instagram and on Threads at The Sound Mind Talks. I love having discussions like this with you all and gathering your responses and experiences. So yeah, come and join the community over there. But until next time, keep listening, keep reflecting, and I'll see you on The Sound Mind.